End of our series. We've been going through the book of Ephesians and talking about that great book. If you've not had a chance to look at some of that, you might want to take a look at some of the old stuff on that, or go back and read Ephesians. It's a fantastic book. If it's your first week to be here, or if it's your first week online watching what we're doing, it's still a good week to be here. Today's passage is probably the most well-known passage in the book of Ephesians. It talks about spiritual warfare and God's armor. And even though, as Christians, we're not supposed to be fighters exactly, Jesus espouses the idea of a Christian being gentle and faithful and kind and forgiving and turn the other cheek. Even though that the Bible does seem to say in more than one place that we are in the middle, even though we don't see it, of a conflict going on, a cosmic conflict between life and death and between God and Satan, and that we're in the middle of that, even if we don't totally see it or realize it. And today's passage is talking about that. And all the weight of heaven's on our side. I mean, the Bible is very clear about that. The gates of hell are going to fall before us, Jesus says, but there's still a fight to happen first. When I was thinking about this, I enjoy Civil War history, and there's a Battle of Chancellorsville that kind of occurred to me. If you're not familiar, how many of you are up on your Civil War history? All right, well, one or two there. So this will be old hat for you guys. But for those of you who may not remember the Battle of Chancellorsville, Chancellorsville is about in northern Virginia there, and it was a battle in 1863, and it was between two major generals, Robert E. Lee of the Army of North Virginia for the South, and fighting Joe Hooker for the Army of the Potomac on the north. And Hooker believed that this would probably be, in his mind, the last battle in the Civil War. He had all of the advantages. He had more men. He had 134,000 compared to Lee, who had 60,000. His men were better supplied. Lee's troops were starving. He were better supplied and had better connection to artillery, had more big guns, had more intelligence. There was a whole spy network. By 1863, the North had a pretty good spy network into the South. And on top of that, Hooker had 2 hot air balloons on both sides of where the battle would be, so he could keep an eye on what was going on. He had a very good idea about how many troops Lee had and where Lee's troops were. It seemed to him to be an easy thing. And he probably had enough troops, enough of an advantage. He could have just marched across the Rappahannock River and attacked Lee straight on. But he hit on this idea of dividing his troops. And so Hooker, on the middle map, if you're very far back, you probably can't see all of that. But on the middle map there, he would send half his troops under General Meade across the river, the Rappahannock, and then he would take the other half, and he personally would command them and go up 15 miles on that river and come in and sneak in behind Lee on the backside, hit him on 2 sides at the same time. In his mind, Lee would have no option at that point, but either to surrender, in which case the Civil War would pretty much be over, or hunker down, and he'd have him in a vice between 2 different armies that were both bigger than what he had, or he'd retreat, and he would run for Richmond down south, and if he did, that dotted line, he was going to send his cavalry ahead to pick them off as they were marching to Richmond. He figured this would be the end of the war, and he bragged about it. He told some troops before the battle, he said, "My plans are perfect. And when I carry them out, may God have mercy on General Lee, because I shall have none." And then the war started. Now again, conventional wisdom in this case said that Hooker had every advantage, and that the smart move for Lee would have been to hunker down and make Hooker come to him and fight. But Lee didn't do that. Lee divided his armies. He kept half his armies to face General Meade across the river and kind of keep them back. And the other half of the army, he actually called for an attack against Hooker, even though he only had 40,000 men against Hooker's 70,000. And it shook the northern general. He didn't understand why Lee was acting like he did. He figured, well, maybe there's something Lee knows that I don't know. And everybody knew that Lee had a great reputation, and it intimidated him. And so Hooker retreated a little bit. He didn't stay where he was at. He didn't keep the high ground. One of his lieutenants was really mad about that. "If we can't hold the top of the hill, sir, we'll never hold the bottom." But he retreated anyway and decided he would hunker down, Hooker, and just starve Lee out. But Lee didn't cooperate. On May 2nd, he split his army again and sent half of the troops on a big hike around to the back of where Hooker's men were at, and he attacked him. He sent Stonewall Jackson around to attack Hooker on the backside. And Hooker's men weren't expecting that at all. When the attack came, it set off a panic in the troops, and they all started running, and that panic kept building, as the Union troops were all running in. It got to be so bad that Hooker actually had to pull back again and retreat a little more. That was May 2nd. On May 3rd, the third day of the battle, all the same advantages Hooker had at the beginning, he still had. He had more troops, he had more intelligence, he had more cannons, but what he no longer had was his troops' confidence. They didn't believe in him any longer, and so he had to retreat altogether. It was, for Lee, his greatest moment. For the Confederacy, it was their biggest victory in the whole Civil War. For Hooker, he never recovered. Lincoln would fire him before too much longer from being a general. Remember, Hooker was the one who said, "My plans were perfect, and God better have mercy because I won't have any." Abraham Lincoln, after the battle, talked about it, and he said about Hooker, he said, "The hen is the wisest of all God's animals because she only cackles once the egg is laid." Now, what's this got to do with spiritual warfare? Well, it's a battle story, but it's more than that. We have every advantage. Our salvation is guaranteed. The price has already been paid for us on the cross. And really, at the cross, the devil's back was broken. At the cross, his doom was guaranteed. It was at the cross where the strong man in Jesus beat back Satan and took what had belonged to Satan and took it back. It was at the cross that everything was undone. And yet, this world is still broken. And our enemy, the devil, is still alive, and it's still going to demand that we fight a little, that we stick our chins out there, that we take some risks, that we push ourselves a little. Just because we have all the advantages does not mean that the enemy is going to lay down. Hooker, in this battle, believed that Lee would make it easy for him, that Lee would understand, just like Hooker did, it's hopeless, and he would make it easy for him. And Lee never made it easy for anybody. The devil also is not going to make it easy for you. And even though his doom is foretold, and even though it's guaranteed, he's not going to retreat just because you think he should. So that's what this passage is about, and that's what our story is about. Paul says in Ephesians chapter 6, verse 10, he says to be strong in the Lord and in his mighty power. In the contemporary English version, it says be strengthened in his strength, and that's kind of a cool phrase. Trust in what God has done. God has already paid the price. God has already given you everything you need for salvation. It's already done. You just got to be strong in that. You got to trust that what he said is true and then live it. Don't just take it for granted. Don't just assume that you have to do nothing. He's done all the work, so now you can stand boldly. He says, put on the full armor of God. And he's hit on this kind of theme before, actually. Paul has. He did it a few chapters ago, chapter 4, when he said to put on righteousness, to put on things like love and joy, fruit of the Spirit, put those kinds of things on. Same idea here. Put on the full armor of God. Dress like how they talk about in an interview. Dress for the job you wish you had, not for the job you had. And so this is kind of the same idea here. Dress for how you hope you'll be seen in Christ. Put on the full armor of God. He'll explain a little bit later I'm getting chewed up by a fly here. Are you seeing that from a distance? Sorry. If you see me doing this, it's not just my normal hand gesture. There's a fly. Where was I at? For dress for job, job you want. Dress for the job. Dress for the job you want. Same idea. Armor of God. Dress for how you want to be seen. God's already done all the work. So live up to that. He says, do that so you can take your stand against the devil's schemes, because the devil also is trying to represent himself different than he is, right? Even though he's defeated, even though he's a roaring lion who's on a chain and can't get you unless you allow him to, he doesn't let you feel that. He's all the time scheming to get you to doubt yourself, all the time scheming to get you to be nervous about him and to be nervous about what he's about. I know whenever we talk about the devil, there are some people here in the crowd who kind of tune that out. I don't believe Maybe somebody would say, I don't believe in a devil. But the Bible's pretty clear that there is such a thing, and that he is around, and that he does have some interest in wrecking us. And it seems like to me, for whatever this is worth, that this has always been one of the easier parts of the Christian faith to prove, that there's something about us, inside us, that's broken. There's something about us, inside us, that tends to push the wrong direction. There's more going on than just physical. You think about the big problems in our society, whatever that, poverty, or violence, unbridled lust, or racism. Racism, and all end of the week here. Again, protests are breaking out. You think about the stuff in our world that is seen as huge societal problems. Well, what's our thinking? Well, we think to ourselves, well, this is nothing unusual. It's just people. It's just flesh and blood. So we'll attack it on that level. We'll educate more. We'll legislate more. We'll fix these things. And it never works. It might help. I mean, I'm all for education. I'm all for smart legislation. But it's not enough. It's not enough. If it were enough, we would have already hit on some solutions for these things with education or legislation. There's some sort of a spiritual thing going on here too. There's something in us that tends to choose the wrong thing. And the Bible identifies that. He says the devil and his schemes. Jesus calls him the father of lies. Peter says he's like a roaring lion seeking someone who he can devour. And his schemes are all the time to get you to doubt yourself or to get you to think incorrectly. One of his lies, he tells you, is that you're no different than anybody else. That's one of his lies. Now, if you're a Christian, of course, that's not true. If you're a Christian, you've been bought and paid for by Jesus Christ himself. If you're a Christian, you're not your own. But he can tell you that. It's been a long time now. I've not gotten a ticket for 15 years or 16. That probably means I'm due, but I've not gotten one in a long time. And my last ticket, he asked me the same question they always ask you. Do you know how fast you were going? And I always say the same thing. Well, I think 54, officer. I try to stay under the limit. I can't believe I was going that fast. But it never works. And he's writing the ticket. And in my heart of hearts, I'm mad about it because I was just following the flow of traffic. That's what I tell myself. I might even say that to Julia when the officer's going back to write the ticket. I was just following the flow of traffic. And I think about the different things I get into, a lot of my problems. I just think I'm like everybody else. I'm just following the flow of traffic, I'm just doing what everybody else does. Sometimes in the office, it can be a temptation. If everybody else is cutting corners, why don't I cut corners? If everybody else is taking a break, why don't I take a break? Sometimes I can do it in my house. If Julia's going to be this way or that way, then don't I deserve to get away with this other thing that I want to do? I'm just following the flow of traffic, officer. I have no idea what it is you're talking about. It's the same thing that a teenager will talk about. Everybody's doing it. And mom or dad will say, well, if they all jumped off a bridge, would you? And the God's honest truth is, if they all jumped off the bridge, I'd look. I'd get to the edge and look. I'd want to see what they're all seeing that I don't. I'd think about it. If they're all jumping, I'd sure give a thought to jumping. It looks like a lot of fun. Look how they're laughing as they go off the edge. And I might do it too. I'm just following the flow of traffic. Another lie the devil might tell you, and it's real similar to the first one, is just be yourself. Trust your instinct, trust your gut, trust who you are inside. Just be true to yourself. And that's great advice unless you're a sinner. And then it's not as good advice. If there's something in me that's warped and broken, trusting myself may not be the best answer. Trusting myself may solve a small problem right now, but it may lead to a bigger problem later on. And even when I get right, if I'm trusting myself and pride is feeding all that, I might be in a worse spot winning than I would be losing. The devil whispers those kinds of things to me, though, because he likes me to believe that I can do it all by myself. When I was in high school, our Sunday school teacher brought in a satanic Bible. He actually brought in several books from different cults and things, but he brought that in too. And he told a little bit about what different cults believe, and he had that satanic Bible there. And he told us 2 or 3 or 4 things about it, but I only remember one. One thing stuck in my head, and I've never forgotten it. It's always been in there. In the Satanic Bible, they talk about the most important holidays for the Satanist. What do you think is the most important holiday for the Satanist? Now, some people would say Halloween. Now, that's a good guess. Halloween's number 2 for the Satanist. But what do you think is the most important holiday? It's your birthday, because you're the most important thing in the world. To the Satanist. To the Satanist, you're the most important thing in the world. What you want is the main thing. And if you really hold tight to that, it can get you in a lot of trouble. Paul says, put on the full armor of God so you can take your stand against the devil's schemes. He says, for our struggle, and the word struggle here is a hand-to-hand combat word, wrestling. Our struggle is not against flesh and blood, but against the rulers and against the authorities, against the powers of this dark world, and against the spiritual forces of evil in the heavenly realms. Paul says there's more going on than just the people we bounce off of. You might think that your enemy is somebody. There might be somebody that when they walk in the room, you tighten up. Somebody at work, maybe a boss or a coworker. As soon as they come in, you start getting ticked off because they treated you wrong. Or maybe somebody, a friend, or it could even be somebody in the church. Hopefully it's not, but it could be. And you've bounced off each other 2 or 3 times, and now whenever you see them, you just kind of get ticked off as soon as they walk in. They become an enemy to you. And you don't think about yourself having that many enemies, but that's kind of how it's become. You just don't like them. And when they come in, you just don't like them. And you have a hard time saying anything nice to them or about them. And if you think that they're the enemy, that your enemy is flesh and blood, then you'll try to get even with them like you would you'll use human tools. You'll use sarcasm or rage or slander behind their back. You'll flatter them when you see them and talk bad about them later on. You'll avoid them. Give them the silent treatment. You'll make sure that you don't let them know about opportunities other people know about. You'll kind of isolate them off to the edge. If they're the enemy, you'll be completely justified in your head not forgiving them. You'll be completely justified in your head taking advantage of them. But the sad part is, Paul says, our struggle is not against flesh and blood. And when I do those things, Kyle Idleman has this great devotion on this. When I do those things, I'm no longer fighting the enemy. I'm fighting for the enemy. When I do those things, I'm no longer fighting against Satan. I'm fighting for him. When I use sarcasm or rage or slander or gossip or unforgiveness, I'm no longer attacking the devil and taking his stuff. I'm helping him. And Paul says we're not to be like that. Our struggle's a different kind of struggle. And even though, again, it's all guaranteed, right? The gates of hell will fall before you, Jesus says. It's a struggle right now. And it's not against the things I see. It's against something kind of behind the scenes that's pushing things to be broken, pushing things to be damaged. And then he starts listing what they are. The armor of God. He says, therefore, put on the full armor of God, so when the day of evil comes, you might be able to stand your ground. And when you've done everything else, just to stand. Just as an illustration of this real fast, you might not remember, but the movie Rocky, the very first Rocky movie, was Best Picture that year. It won the Oscar. It was the best picture of the year. If you watched the later Rockies, he becomes kind of a cartoon character as time goes along. He gets more and more chiseled and oiled, and he's a superhero by the end of it, bringing Russia and America together. But at the beginning, he's kind of an overweight, out of shape boxer who's given this 1 in a million chance to fight the heavyweight champion of the world, and he knows there's no way in the world he can beat the guy. It's obvious he can't beat the guy. There's no way he's going to beat the guy. But he just refuses to bend. The whole movie's about standing when you feel like everything is against you. Standing even when it'd be easy to cut and run. Standing even when every part of you is crying for some relief. That's this notion. That's what this verse is about. It'll be cool if when the day of battle comes, if you can take some ground. But man, at the very least, you need to be able to say at the end of it, I'm still going to be standing right here. And the whole world may move behind me, but I'm not moving. I'm not moving because I'm standing on truth. I'm standing on what's real. I'm not going to bend. And that's what this is about. He says, stand firm then with the belt of truth buckled around your waist. Our first biggest weapon is the truth. So many different things right now are trying to distract you with lies. So many different media things are telling you shouldn't be satisfied, you shouldn't be content, so you should want more, you should take better care of you. You are the most important thing in the world. And against all that, we put on the belt of truth. We remember that Jesus died for us. We remember that Jesus gave everything for us and that he's the truth and the life and the way to God. And so we make a decision to follow hard after him and put his will above our own. Jesus says, if anyone loves me and gives their life for me, I'll give them life back in return. And if you lose your life for me, you'll gain it in the end. And that's the truth. On the other hand, those who try to save their life in this world are going to lose it at the end. And that's also the truth. And so that's my foundation. And not just that, he says, the breastplate of righteousness. You put that on over your heart. You guard your heart with it. So it's not just knowing what the truth is, it's doing it. Sometimes it can be as simple as making a decision that I'm going to try to pray more. You know, he wants me to pray, so I'm going to pray more. Sometimes it can be a decision to forgive somebody who I don't want to forgive. You know, not one part of me wants to do it, but I'm trusting his truth and not my own. I'm trusting he knows what's going on more than I do. I'm trusting that my life will be better if I go his direction instead of mine, and I use that to guard my heart. He says, my feet fitted with the readiness that comes from the gospel of peace. So I'm marching forward to bring people together. My enemy's not flesh and blood. I'm not fighting against you guys. I'm not fighting against my neighbors. I'm certainly not fighting against my family. I'm not fighting against my coworkers. I'm trying to bring them together. I'm trying to bring people closer together to God. My whole ministry now is a ministry of peace and reconciliation. I have an agenda, but it's not my own agenda. It's his. He says, in addition to this, take up the shield of faith so you can put out the flaming darts that come from the evil one. Okay, let's think through that. What kind of darts does the devil shoot at us? Well, there's temptation, right? There's temptation. Usually temptation comes couched in a you should feel sorry for yourself kind of thing. After all you've put up with at home, aren't you entitled to just a little bit of happiness? After all you put up with at work, I mean, surely taking 5 minutes off early or stealing that one little thing isn't the worst thing. After all you do for everybody else, aren't you allowed, little temptations? And if I could just grab this one thing, well, then I'd be happy. If I could just have this one thing, well, then I'd feel better. And the devil's shooting those things at you, so you keep faith. You trust that what God says is going to pan out eventually, and I hold on to that. But that's not his only dart. The devil likes to shoot darts of discouragement at a person. He likes to shoot darts of discouragement. And even his name, the word Satan with a capital S is the devil. But the word Satan with a small s in Hebrew just means accuser. The devil's name means accuser. And he's all the time accusing you. He'll pick some little flaw in you and amplify it to a huge degree. And you hear that noise in your head. You do. You can't do that. You can't do that. I might challenge you, hey, you need to pray more. Well, you can't do that. That voice comes in there. You're way too busy to be taking time out and do that. That'd be boring. You got more stuff going on. Or I tell you to be generous. Well, you can't do that. You're just barely holding all your money together as it is. How are you going to do the things you got planned for next year? Or you need to go share your faith. Well, you can't do that. You're not good at talking about those kinds of things. Other people do that. Or that accusation can talk about some sin in your life. If the people sitting on the pew with you knew who you were, they wouldn't approve. They'd shake their head. They'd frown. If that voice gets real strong, you'll start wondering if people do know. So they looked at me kind of funny. You wonder what they're thinking. He's whispering all the time. You're not enough. And it's just a lie, because even though we're sinners and even though we're broken, he's chosen us. And if we hold on tight to him, we can get through anything. So we take that shield of faith up so I can take care of those darts that come along. And on top of that, I take the helmet of salvation and the Word of God, sword of the Spirit, Word of God. One thing, too, on all these verbs, the word take here, but all the verbs, get the shield of faith and the belt and all, it's all plural. We're a fighting force. Carl Bridges talks about this notion that it's a picture of a fighting force coming together, not one lonely soldier, but all of us together. And we all get into God's Word. And we all supporting one another. We're all helping one another. We're all guarding one another. He says, pray in the Spirit on all occasions with all kinds of prayers and requests. And with this in mind, he says, just keep on praying for all God's people. So we're lifting each other up, right? And he says, and then pray for me, Paul says, that whenever I speak, I'll have the right words to say. And I can fearlessly make known the mystery of the gospel, for which I'm an ambassador in chains. Pray that I declare it fearlessly, like I should. Why would anybody make a prayer request, pray that I be fearless? It's because Paul was afraid. It's because Paul knew how hard it was to be a Christian. Paul was right in the middle of the battle. And so Paul says, you support me in this thing, and I'm going to support you in this thing, and we are in this together. Excuse me, pardon me. The fly left me alone. Just got the cough, and I'll be fine. The Battle of Thermopylae, another battle that was famous, the movie 300 talks about that. Just 300 Spartans stood in the way of this one pass. The Persian army was coming to attack the Greeks, and they had to come through this mountain pass. And 300 Spartans, locked together with their shields up and their shields over their heads, were able to hold off 1,000,000 Persians for days because they did it together. You know, they did it together. We're stronger together than we are apart. I don't want to get into a big thing here. The last 18 months has been hard. And I don't regret any of the decisions we made as a church. I don't know what we could have done different, and at the time we did the best we could. Every church did. You know, we wanted to keep people safe as best we could. And we've had people get sick with this virus in our church, and we've even lost a few people to the virus. So it's serious, and we wanted to be as smart as we could be about helping people stay safe. But it has come at a cost. And one of the costs has been that some people have taken the attitude that maybe I don't need this that much. Maybe it doesn't help me that much. You know, we were several months away from it, and I did okay. And I just think that's a dangerous way to think. I think Paul talks about that in all this thing, but it's dangerous, and it goes back to that essential selfishness I was telling you about earlier. You know, maybe you were fine. Maybe during the pandemic, your reading and prayer just got more serious than it ever did, and you missing this time didn't hurt you at all, but maybe you weren't really the target here. Maybe it was your kid. And out of all this, you're going to be fine, but your kid doesn't really care for this stuff anymore. Or maybe at the end of this, you're going to be fine, but your neighbor has no interest in it. It doesn't mean anything to them. Or maybe it wasn't even something like that. Maybe it was somebody here at the church, and they depended on you. When you were here, they leaned on you, and then you took this break. And again, what else could we do? Right? I mean, I don't regret any of it. I don't. What else could we do? It was a weird season. But it came at a cost, right? And you were gone, and they needed you, and now people are kind of on their own, and we are so much stronger when we come in together. When we make this decision that we're going to stand for God, and we're going to do it together, and we're going to lift one another up, and we're going to pray for one another, and we're going to get deep into God's Word, we're going to hang on to His truth. If we do that, the gates of hell, Jesus says, cannot stand up against us. The battle is guaranteed, and whether the enemy makes it easy for us or not, it doesn't really even matter. We're going to win. When you think about the winning, of course, what's that mean? Well, it can mean a lot of things. As a Christian, you're supposed to have peace, but a lot of Christians don't have peace. You're supposed to be content, well, a lot of Christians aren't content. You can live in that discontent long enough that you think it's impossible to ever have it any better than you do, but it doesn't have to be that way. You can have a marriage that's transformed. You can have kids that are drawn deeper to you and deeper to God. It's possible, I promise. It is. You just got to hang on tight to Him. He knows how to live this life, and if we hold on to Him, He's going to take us where we need to go. There's a couple stories in the Old Testament. They're kind of the same story, but it's different context. One of them is a story about Israel when they come into the Promised Land. Jericho is the first city they face. They had huge walls and really well defended. And God tells them, I want you to march around the city 7 times and I'll bring the walls down. I'll do all the work. You just march around 7 times and I'll bring the walls down. And so they march around once and twice and 3 and 4 times and nothing changes on the walls. There's not one crack. There's not one sign that God's doing anything. It is possible. There's a VeggieTales cartoon about it, and the guards on the wall in VeggieTales are mocking the guys marching. Oh, looks pretty cool on you marching, and 1, 2, 3, and nothing's happening. 4, 5, 6, nothing's happening. 7, and it all comes down. And God does just what he said he'd do. And if they had quit any time before that, they wouldn't have seen his work. They wouldn't have seen his hand. There's a story later in the Old Testament where a guy named Naaman, he's really important. He's a soldier and he's top of the army, and he means something. He's powerful. He's political. He's connected, and he gets leprosy. And so he comes into Israel. He hears that Elisha can do miracles, and so he goes into Israel and he finds Elisha and he says, "I'll pay any price. I brought all this money. I'll pay any price. I want you to heal me." And Elisha says, "Sure thing." Actually, Elisha didn't even talk to him. Elisha sends his servant out to talk to him. And the servant says, Elisha says, "Sure thing." He says, "Go to the Jordan River and dunk yourself 7 times in the Jordan River and you'll be fine." And it makes Naaman mad. I didn't come to talk to the servant. I came to talk to the main guy, and he wouldn't even come out and talk to me. And I was sure with all the money I was bringing, he'd come out and make some sort of a chant or do something powerful, and I'd see it, and I'd be healed. And if I'm just going to dunk in a river, I can dunk in a river at home. This whole trip's been for nothing. And one of his servants, one of his slaves, says, "Master," to Naaman, "Master," he says, "listen, if the prophet had said something hard, you'd have done it. Go bring me 20 elephant trunks. You'd have done it. And whatever hard thing he'd have told you to do, you'd have done. So how much more if he says, just dunk yourself and be clean?" And so Naaman agrees to do it. And he goes to the river and he dunks himself once and twice and 3 times. And I imagine he's staring bullet holes in this slave. Like, if I come out at 7 and I'm still sick, you're going to be more than sick. I mean, it's that kind of a thing, right? 5, 6, and nothing changes. The spot doesn't look any different. Nothing's any different. He's got to feel like a fool. Everybody watching him. 4, 5, 6, 7, he's brand new. And if he had quit dunking before that, he never would have seen God move. If they had to quit marching around Jericho, they never would have seen God move. And maybe right now you're in the middle of the march. You're in the middle of the long pause. God has said he'll be faithful. You believe he'll be faithful, but he's not been faithful yet. I just want to encourage you, put on the full armor of God. Don't fall down to some devil's scheme. Make a decision that you're going to hold tight to him, and he will take you through. I'm going to have the band come back up. And I want to make this real specific to you today. If you come in today and you're struggling in something important, at your work or with a relationship or with your kids, with your husband or wife, and something important, and it's not working like you want it to work, take advantage of these moments. They're precious. And they call this place Mount Pleasant. So you're up on the mount right now and you're close to God. And take advantage of this time, It's a cool time. It's an important time. And the music is playing, and people all over the room are praying, and you're in the middle of it. And during this time and this moment, it'd be a great time for you to pray. And we invite you to come up here and pray with the Tackett's or with Blaine, and I'll be up here in the front too. Or just pray here on the steps and ask God to move, or pray where you're at, And I also want to say something to you. If you personally are not experiencing the love, the joy, the peace, the patience that's supposed to come with being a child of God, you have never given your heart to him, then today is the day. Today is the day. This is such a powerful and sacred moment. We're up here on the hill, and God is moving, and when the band is playing, I just encourage you to take advantage of this time. And again, you can talk to any of us up here. I just want to give my heart to God. And we'll walk you through what you need to do. You know, we'll pray with you in front of the crowd here. We'll talk about baptism. We'll talk about taking the next steps and getting yourself where you want to be. Today could be your day. And that's a powerful thing, you know. It's a powerful thing when God whispers in your ear. It's time to move. And if you're feeling that whisper, then I want you to take advantage of this moment. Stand up here with us. I'm going to pray, and then Danielle's going to lead us. Dear Lord God, I pray right now